FY 2020-2021 proposed budget is a proposed calendar so that you will know during this discussion where we'll be carrying on some other discussions. On Thursday, May 28th is our regularly scheduled work session at 4 o'clock. On Tuesday, June the 2nd is our regularly scheduled meeting at 6 p.m. On Monday, June the 8th, Alicia Searcy will provide an end-of-the-year information to the Board of Commissioners, how we talked about how we might have some excess funds because we've been under budget in many areas and some of the departments have not spent all their stuff. That will come to you via email. And then on Thursday, June the 11th, we will have a work session at 4 o'clock to discuss this year-end, close out a budget amendment. And on Tuesday, June the 16th, we are going to have a special call meeting to do the year-end closeout, and that will be at 4 o'clock. And I believe, Susan, we decided all of these will still continue to be here at the Ag Center to honor the social distancing and the shelter in place for our senior citizens, so that if anybody needed to come, we do have enough space here for them, even though the acoustics aren't that great. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to our finance director. We went over some things, the notes that y'all had, I still have here. I think we covered most of them, and then we'll open it up for discussion from each of you. So, Alicia.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Glad y'all could come out on Saturday morning to talk about this. The main thing that we did, we tried to take the suggestions that were given in the last meeting and try to work with those to try to come up with some cost savings that could allow us to move some money into the sheriff's budget. And we agree with you that that is a concern and something that we want to address. We looked at some options, and just so you know, I just want to put this out there, that this is not part of the plan, but last year, if we had not rolled back sales tax, we would have taken in an additional $1.1 to $1.2 million in property tax revenue. Now, for someone that has a $100,000 property, or the value of the property is $100,000, the assessed value would be $40,000. That would be about a $20 a year effect on that taxpayer increase over what they actually paid last year to the county. Now, that's only the county's portion, so I know the tax bills reflect other information, but for our portion only, that would have been the effect. And if we gave across the board raises to everyone in the county, that's about the amount of money it would take to do that. So just so you have that information in your mind. Now, I gave you a sheet that's labeled Carroll County Proposed Budget Adjustments. And so this is what we're looking at this point in time. I'll go over the reductions first. The first reduction was the tax commissioner bonuses of $15,000. Hopefully we will be able to do something for all the employees at the end of the year, and so we feel like we can take care of that there. The chairman agreed to take out the funding for the operations manager. That's going to save us about $110,000 a year. We have the $106,700 in equipment that was in the budget that we can use our expense savings from this year, FY20, to purchase those things. They're one-time purchases, so we can go ahead and buy them and get them out and not have to keep those in the FY21 budget. And then I'm going to skip the next one and come back to it because there's two lines that affect it. Animal services, we took $40,000 out of their salary line item. And then the line above that is for the Correctional Institute. I had reduced the funding for their salaries because I had to reduce their revenue last year. They provide 2 correctional officers to the city of Carrollton. The city of Carrollton pays us about $60,000 a year each for those correctional officers. Well, with the prior warden, we had a difficult time keeping people in those positions. And so the city of Carrollton was getting about 1.5 people. So we were generating about $90,000 in revenue. So last year, I reduced their budget line to reflect that 1.5 persons to offset that reduction in revenue. Since we've had the new warden, he has been able to keep 2 COs in that position through FY20. So he and I talked about it, and I had not increased the 90,000 back to 120. So after we had some discussion, he feels like he can keep those 2 positions filled full time, which will create another $30,000 in revenue. So I can put the $30,000 back into his salary line to take care of that, the salary on that correctional officer that'll be working for City of Carrollton. So when you look at their salary line, I reduced it by $14,800, which was the additional amount I budgeted over the $30,000. So if you take $30,000 and $14,800, you get $44,800, and that was the amount of the increase in the warden's salary. So I'm increasing revenue to offset part of that expense, and then I'm reducing the budget to offset the other part of that expense. That's a little hard to understand, and if you don't see it on paper, it may not come to you, but I'll be glad to sit down with each of you and show you where it works in the budget. So we came up with total reductions of $286,500. And then below that, you see the $30,000 increase in revenue. And then that left $311,650 to fund 5 positions at the Sheriff's Department. The chairman and the sheriff spoke and had quite a good conversation about what would be a priority for them and how they wanted to see this money spent. And they felt like more manpower was important to them rather than getting the pay equity increases that we had talked about if this was the only amount of money that we had to work with. And they felt like they needed more boots on the ground. The other thing that they felt like was that they felt like if their employees were getting increases, that all of Carroll County employees should get increases. They didn't think it was fair that we single them out and give them something without giving everybody else something. So with that said, we worked out the numbers, and it came to 5 additional positions, including salary, Social Security, health insurance, and retirement. So if you add, and then there was a little bit left over, $4,850 that was just kind of left hanging, so I increased the contingency by that. So if you add the $311,650, the $48,50, and you take out the $30,000 increase in revenue, that gets you to the $286,500, which would offset the expenses or the reduction in expenses. So that's where we came to what we have here. This would allow us to roll the millage rate back again this year if that's what we elect to do. So I want to give you the information, and hopefully you've got what you need to make the decisions you need to make. Then if you have any questions, I'm open.
Okay, so on the sheriff's positions, there's still, I guess, several dynamics going on with the original commitment that we had there. So one of my understandings, and I'm not going against that you've talked with the sheriff and y'all worked stuff out, but I guess one of my understandings was that the reason there were some open seats there was they were having a hard time necessarily filling every position that we had approved for them position-wise, not necessarily the funding of it. So if we go with this plan, and that's fine if you've spoken with the sheriff and we're doing this, but I guess I don't want us to lose track of that original commitment that we're still going to have to at some point fund the fourth year, and we're still at some point going to have to back this number out of the other positions, I guess, that have been, that we've utilized money from in years past. Is that correct, Alicia?
Well, before we started talking about this budget, there were 8 unfunded positions. And so with the money that we have available, we're committing to fund 5 of those. I think that the chairman and the sheriff agreed to a new plan.
I'll take over. So what Terry and I talked about is it's 4 years later. Things are different than they were 4 years ago, and that while again this is not perfect, this is where they felt any extra money would go. I have asked them. Alicia and I talked with Brad yesterday. Terry and I talked Thursday night. We talked again last night. Not to have them reinvent the wheel, but honestly things have changed. And I've asked them to come back July or August, whatever works in their schedule and their timing, and bring us a new 2-year plan, because majority of us will be sitting here this time next year and the next budget. So for 2 years, we will sit here. There won't be any change in the guard and stuff. And so the thoughts were, we need to do a new commitment, that what was done, what wasn't done, what decisions, it's to me almost, I've got his whole thing right here, the original 4-year plan. I've got what year we didn't fund, what year we have fund. It's almost like, let's just start brand new and him come back and give us a proposal that says, this is what I need and I need now. Whether it's the same thing he wanted before or new things, I think going forward, we have a 2-year plan that we as a board commit to ourselves, or we don't commit to. And so that's what we discussed. So right this moment, this is where, when I said we had this extra funds, and if we come up with more, great, but it was, to my plan to him was, you spend, this is what we think we have for you, and then they decide what they want to do with it. They made it very clear they wanted boots on the ground. So that's what they're going to strive for with this extra money. So that's my plan, is we commit as a group. So there's no previous discussions. We come straight, start all over, and they come to us and say, this is now what we need. It's 2020. This is newer equipment we need, or this is how we're rearranging. I don't know what's going to come from that, but I think we need to have, as a group, a new commitment, and we agree to it or we don't agree to it, but it's ours then. So, and we own it. So that's kind of the discussion we had. There again, y'all, I can't say it enough, and I know the public agrees with me. We can't be more lucky to have a sheriff, because obviously look how many years he's been reelected, and the cohesiveness of that group and how they work so well with all our departments, that he feels very strongly, as much as he really, really wants raises for all his people, it will cause an imbalance. That said, if you want to give him the raises, he's not going to turn them down, but he feels he wants to be a team player. He agrees that we all need to be supportive of each other. So this was what he and I came up with, and if I'm putting words in his mouth, I'm sorry, Terry, if you're listening, hurry up and call in, but and each of you, please feel free to call him and have your individual discussion to make sure I am relaying what I feel the conversation was between the two of us. But then you and I and Brad had a conversation yesterday, and this pretty much reflects what I'm saying.
Yes, and another thing that the Sheriff's Department, they were very sensitive about the current economic situation.
Very.
And they didn't want to put Carroll County in a position to committing to something that was going to be difficult to live up to. They understand that the virus has affected the economic situation and that none of us can project exactly what that effect's going to be. I've speculated, I've done the best that I can to project what I think will happen, but he agrees that there's no way to really know going down the road what we're looking at. So another thing we discussed was waiting for 6 months. And in January, let's take a look. And if revenues indeed support what we had seen in FY 2020 before the virus, then we could do raises at that point. And I think he would be satisfied to do that. But if revenues don't support it, then we're not locked into doing something that we're going to have a difficult time making work or having to make cuts, giving raises and then having to make cuts to make the budget work out.
Let me go back to the operations manager. So this was slightly a communication thing on ours, and maybe it's mostly mine, because George, you and I have talked several times over the last couple of weeks about how I don't need an operations manager, but yet I have found over the last couple of weeks things that when the previous chairman left, those jobs were sent out to other staff members. So other staff has taken on some roles and some responsibilities. We have found a few holes, and Avery's pointed them out to me too, that I will now take on some of those job duties I didn't know, or we didn't know had gotten not passed on. But you and I have talked, we didn't, so I either didn't explain that to her, but we wanted to leave the job description in there. I see some areas as we grow as a county that we may need an extra person to be doing some other stuff, but not necessarily in the role that the previous person had. So I'm glad she funded it, because there again, we have more money to give to the sheriff. But going forward, we talked about it. We don't need it right this moment, and I'm quite capable of taking on those roles and taking on those responsibilities. The other was the animal service. I want to make sure, it says in here new full-time. She has a part-time position that has not been filled, because with KC doing the proposal for y'all, going through and analyzing the animal shelter and working with Sue, coming up with those plans that we put in there for y'all. There is a part-time person we have not filled, because we're waiting to see what KC and Sue might present for us. So I want to make sure you understand that part-time position is still funded. We just didn't take it from part-time to full-time. So that would be the difference with the salary, the insurance, and all that other stuff. So the part-time person is still there in that department. So that's how we came up with these numbers.
I want to say back to the sheriff, and I appreciate the sheriff, working with us to try to make sure that we can do something that's equitable and fair across the board, and I certainly appreciate that, and I'm fine with us moving forward with this. What I don't want us to lose sight of is to simply say, and not arguing with you, Michelle, but to say, okay, well, now we're all here, now we're going to put a 2-year plan together. I think we need to look at what have we accomplished since the original 4-year plan. And while public safety, I can presume, will probably always be at the forefront and take a priority in our budget. In the same note, we've got many departments that have not really been looked at in the same manner, that they may need pay increases, or we may need to look at plans for getting them up to a standard and so forth. So while this is great and I'm fine with it and I'm not arguing, and I certainly appreciate everything the sheriff and his chief deputy and staff are doing to work with us, I just want us to be careful that when we start down a path, sometimes it's great to end that, not saying that there would never be an opportunity that the sheriff wouldn't need raises again, but we've got to try to get through things and then try to holistically look at other departments. We can still prioritize them. So I just want to be careful that we make sure we take into consideration what have we accomplished in the past 3 years, and not just look at it as that we're not going to talk about any of that anymore. We're only going to look at today. I think it's important, because we're still going to have to balance money moving forward and looking at other departments as well for them to have pay raises. So that's nothing negative against the sheriff. That's the whole reason a plan was implemented, was to try to get them up to a standard. So let's just don't lose sight of what maybe we have accomplished in trying to move forward, so.
I agree with you. I mean, I think we have a pay equity situation across the board in Carroll County. And when we looked at the per capita revenue compared to other counties last time, we saw where we were one of the lowest, if not the lowest, in this area. And with 70% of your budget being personnel, then the personnel are the ones that are not properly funded when you don't have the revenue to support that. So you're exactly right. I mean, we need to look at it across the board, and when you do look at it across the board, I think you'll see pay equity issues within most of the departments. Now, there may be one or two that we're okay in, but I think in general, there are pay equity things when we look at Carroll County versus our surrounding counties and our surrounding municipalities. We're just not competitive, and we've got that. I think that needs to be something that's kept on the front of everybody's mind as we move forward through the next few years, is how do we resolve that?
I'd like to say I'll talk this way, but need to be looking that way for the mic to pick it up. But I'm very glad to see that we took a move and reduced, cut out that operations manager funding thanks. I think that's a great thing, especially at this time. I did also yesterday talk with the sheriff, and Terry could not have been more cooperative. I think, as y'all know, we're just very fortunate to have him to work with. I am for, of course, funding law enforcement and the fire department and all of our first responders and county government, like you just mentioned, Alicia's employees all together. But it's great to have an understanding during this economic turmoil that we're in right now, and have someone like him to work with us and say, well, hey, down the road we can look at more, but right now in this economic time, let's do what we need to do to hold the funds. I wanted to ask, I guess us as a group, I walked away from our last meeting with the understanding that this budget showing an increase, that we would be nimble, and what bothers me, I guess, overall is just that we're still looking at a net 2% increase round figures in the midst of such a turmoil. I know our cash reserve is good, but we mentioned last time that we would quickly be able to identify specific steps if we needed to reduce the budget. And not to put anybody on the spot, but I'd just like to know, what are those, like on the front end, in order to have a little more comfortableness with a budget that shows an increase. I'm very concerned about that, and that we haven't yet identified steps if we do see a decrease in the economy, or not the turnaround that we might expect. Things are still looking, nationally at least, and throughout the state, like it's not going to turn around fast. And even this morning on the news was things about folks making $40,000 or less, 40% of them will be unemployed, and so on. And so the third quarter doesn't even look good. So I'm wondering, can we identify like any specific things that we would consider if we don't see this turned around, so that this budget can be modified quickly? I guess that's my question. Or do we have anything in mind that we would do, 1, 2, and 3 steps that we can cut if we need to?
First of all, budget to budget, there is an increase. Budget to reality, there's a decrease.
Right.
So, what we're projecting for this year, for FY20, this budget is going to be less than that actual.
Yeah.
So, even though budget to budget there is an increase, when you look at what we're actually going to do this year, this budget is going to be less than that. So, you know, we were conservative last year in our budget numbers, hoping that we would have some expense savings and be able to have some money to do some other things with some of these capital projects that we talked about, or equipment and that kind of stuff. But the first thing I would say that we should look at, you know, if we get into a situation of coming up way short of where this budget's going to be, last year we lost about 40 employees over the year through retirement or through moving to other jobs and that kind of thing. So one thing I would recommend, that if we start seeing revenue numbers coming in slower, that when somebody leaves, we really take a hard look at that job and see if we can do without it in the short term, so that we would not have to ask anybody to take a pay cut or furlough anybody. Maybe we don't fill those positions until the economy returns. And I didn't have enough time to go back and look historically how many positions we lose per year. But, you know, if we lost 40 positions, that could be a pretty significant savings depending on what level those people are at. And, you know, it depends on what department they're in too. You know, if they're in the sheriff's department or if they're in the fire department, we may not have much room to not fill those positions. But those would be things I would suggest that we look at as a first line cut. And there's a lot of things that are going on post-virus or we're not post-virus yet, but we're looking at to do post-virus in the court systems that I think will save some money. The judges are using Zoom. We don't know at this point whether there will be fewer jury trials, but there could be fewer jury trials. That will save us some money. So there's a number of things going on out there that I think that we could utilize to help save some money. And then you've got, you know, public works. We spend a lot of money in public works. You know, we might take a look at that and see if we can reduce those services slightly so it wouldn't affect taxpayers in a big way, but it might save us a little bit of money. And those are my suggestions, you know.
Well, I wasn't here during the time running my own family business with my husband, but George, you were here during the leanest times, and I can say from 2015 when I joined, our employees are lean. There's probably a tiny bit of waste, but the truth of the matter is every day the things they get done for all of us and our constituents, repurposing, recycling, reusing, extreme creativity in how they get the job done. I know you probably can echo that from those times that our employees know how to hunker down. Yes, they know how to hunker down better than any of us probably sitting here. They've already done it. They know how to get back down again if they had to. But I think we're working with a group of employees that are very on board and know how to do it and know how to do it well. Sadly to say, but that's good.
I would say, and not to put words in your mouth, but another thing I guess that I have seen to maybe try to bolster what Ernie is trying to accomplish is obviously as we move through the years and you're judging how revenues are coming in, you all have communication with your department heads to say, hey, there may be certain things in there that are legitimate, but I need you to hold off on buying that right now. So obviously that might be another mechanism that we could add in just to understand that you'll be watching it closely and there are things that maybe you can control the spending at different levels of the year as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, immediately when we started, you know, when we realized we were going to have to close parks and rec, the chairman went across the board and said, look, if you don't absolutely need it, don't spend it. And we're seeing that cost savings in our year-to-date budget report right now because, I mean, we've even not turned lights on in areas where people weren't working, you know, just little things that can add up over time. And the department heads have really responded to it and not spent money unless they absolutely had to. And that's just during this short period, and I'm sure if this extends that they'll continue to work with us and try to do everything they can.
And like we said, you know, the rec department, those that are working here in the ag are going to be working the early voting polls, so we won't be having the expense of many poll workers, so we're saving in that department. So yes, you'll see some new faces in the next few weeks working there, but they've been very gracious to do that and still continue to try and figure out how they're going to open their own departments. Because I look forward to the rec department opening real soon. We look forward to the ag department opening soon, but in the meantime, they've taken on not us having to hire poll workers. So that's the extreme savings there. So I think we know how to do it. And, you know, in previous years, we only did the budget amendment in June. Well, you know, this past year I broke the mold. We did it in January, we made a budget amendment. So that's not saying that this thing cannot be touched again throughout the next month. So even though I have a budget, it doesn't, if there's no money, we will be cutting. I mean, as a chairman, I'm just not going to be, I mean, we're not, that's just not an option. And I believe the employees feel the same way. So there is the opportunity. It's not written in stone that we can only do it in June. We've already done it in January. If we decide we have better funds again, we'll look at it again in January or February, depending on how the time comes out. So this is always a moving target.
And that's good. I just didn't want to spend down all of our reserve. And, so that's good to know. I've only been here 10 months, so and during that time, I have really enjoyed working. You mentioned Public Works, Alicia, and they, in the springtime was disastrous with the gravel roads, and they were always there. I couldn't ask for better rapport with any department, but they were just always there responding wherever quickly. So, yeah, good. That's good to know.
Steve, you had a question?
Well, I'd like to back up a minute to the sheriff and hire these new folks in. I took a look at the starting pay for the city of Carrollton, Paulding County, and Douglas. They're what their starting pay for their deputies, and that's where it starts with us. We start these guys out at a lower pay than those other three places, and I only looked at those three because they're right here around us. Does the sheriff, has he got the money here to give him a little bit of flexibility, and maybe when he hires these new folks in, he can hire them in at a little bit higher price, and we can stop this loss? Because it just goes, as it, you know, y'all understand what I'm saying? We hire in at a lower rate, so when they get a raise, they don't ever come up to a deputy in another county that's making the same amount of money.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be able to hire new people in for more than what he's got existing deputies working for. So I think that they would hire in at an entry-level rate, and then once they get past probation, then they would move to that job rate,
Yeah, but it's still,
which is still below.
still behind.
That's
and
right.
And I agree with Clint on this. I don't want us to lose sight down the road of us trying to get our, trying to get our pay scale even with some of our competition.
Well, the only way to do that is to find more revenue or to cut more. And
Right.
so that's.
Well, I mean, I know it sounds like we're kicking the can down the road, but I think let's deal with what we got here now. But let's not lose sight of the original agreement with the sheriff's department. And this is something that it kind of stuck with me. Unless my math is wrong, our actual increase is 1.9%. Am I right on that?
Budget over budget.
Yeah.
That's about, I
Right.
thought it was about 2%, but yeah.
Well, okay, I
maybe
might have been off. I'm not an accountant. I was a math.
Well, I
I'm
round.
accounting and confused with arithmetic. That's two different things.
And I round things. I mean, if it was 1.9, in my mind, it would have been
All right.
6%.
Well, we need to find a way to convey this to the media outlets so that they see that it actually is 1.9%. 9 instead of 4.2, because they're advertising 4.2 and it's not.
Well, if I can speak to what Alicia was talking about a minute ago, whether you agree with the budget or not, or you have issues or not, the reality is, even with the downturn, what Alicia is saying is that we conservatively budgeted revenues in the current fiscal year, and they've done a good job of trying to control expenses. So as we move closer to the target date of ending this fiscal year at June 30th, the revenues, even though they're going to slow down in sales tax consumption, they're still projecting in the finance department that will come in above the projections of revenues. So what she's saying is that while we may end up with a $55 million budget, we may actually, for FY21, we may actually, and I'm just making this number up, this is not something to be printed, we may come in at 57 million in revenue, okay, in the current year. So now you're looking at a $2 billion decrease from the actual numbers that we may end with to the new budget that we're going to take in the next year. So at some point, the budget process becomes semantics, because you have to start with somewhere, which is the budget. But the reality is, as we move closer to June 30th, we're going to have a new number of what are those actuals. So to your point, and I'm agreeing with you, but to your point, as we move closer to June 30th, we may be, quote unquote, coming into a reality that we have a decreased budget based off the actual numbers from this year.
Yeah, I understand that. We just got to get the folks in the county to understand.
Yeah, because right now, I agree with you, and I agree with both of you, but right now what's being reported is, oh my goodness, we're increasing the budget over 4% when things look so dire, and there's not the understanding that we're really in a much better position, so, yeah.
Well, and you got to understand, half of that increase is from grant money
Right,
and
accounting
accounting changes.
Right.
So it's, part of it's just the method in which we're reporting it.
Yeah.
And part of it's additional funding that we've already secured or will be securing. And if we don't secure it, then we won't, like the fire department grant, if we don't secure that, then we're not going to fund those fire stations. I mean, so, yeah, it looks, on paper it looks one way, but you really have to get down into the numbers and work with it a little bit to see what reality is.
Yeah. Yeah, if we could just get, to Steve's point, that information out there, I think it would make the public feel better.
And the two largest things, here again, not saying that we can't wish that we could adjust certain things in a perfect world in the budget, but the two largest things that are the increases for FY21 directly relate to public safety.
Yeah.
There's always an outcry in the community, take care of public safety, properly fund them, properly staff them. So two of our largest expenditures for FY21 are doing exactly that and accomplishing exactly what the community wants. So yes, we're all right in what we're saying, but to your point, we need to communicate to the public that while there are certain significant increases within line items, those directly relate to public safety. And no one has come up to me and said, cut public safety, cut the manpower, cut their pay. So we're doing what the community has asked us to do through the years.
Okay, so at this point, is there a consensus for me to go forward and present this budget to you on June the 2nd? Okay, so I see one, I see two, I see three nodding heads. Okay, so at this point then, do I need to ask for a motion because it's a work session? I do, or can I just adjourn it? Okay, so not here anymore. I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much. Christy, you need to turn this off?
All right. I guess I didn't have to ask all